Welcome to the Global Roundtable organized by the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development. Today we have the pleasure of the company of Mrs. Vibeke Jensen, the Director of the UNESCO office in New York. Welcome, Mrs. Jensen. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting to the program.
And before we start, I would just say a few words about you and your beautiful career. So Mrs. Jensen is a Danish citizen who started her UNESCO career in 1989. She's an education specialist that has been really lucky, fortunate, to live and work in a wide array of countries like Burkina Faso, Thailand, Nepal, Pakistan, Vietnam, and Tanzania. And in July 2013, she started to work as the director of the UNESCO office here in New York, and also as the director of the United Nations Secretary General's Global Education First Initiative, known as GEFI. So today we are going to talk, of course, about UNESCO, about education for sustainable development, and about your experience and your work. And I think I would like to start by talking about UNESCO first. So, as probably many of our spectators know, UNESCO was created in 1945. And from our research, the definition why it was created and how it happened, it says it was created in order to respond to the firm belief of nations forged by 2 world wars in less than a generation that political and economic agreements are not enough to build a lasting peace. Peace must be established on the basis of humanity's moral and intellectual solidarity. So with your wide experience working at UNESCO, could you a little bit tell us, in your experience, what does UNESCO do? And how have you felt it has been instrumental in achieving this mission defined in 1945?
Thank you. UNESCO is a member state organization which meets member states meet every 2 years in the General Conference, and they discuss and agree to UNESCO's work program and budget for the next 2 years. UNESCO stands for United Nations Education, Science, Culture organization, and that was the 3 sectors that we worked in originally. And later on, there was another sector added on, another C, which is the communication and information sector. So UNESCO strongly believes in promoting dialogue and communication and collaboration in the area of education, of science, natural science and social science, in the area of culture and communication. And so we bring member states together, governments, but also with civil society, with universities, with the academia, to really have a discussion about how we can make the world more peaceful, how we can support sustainable development, and how by collaborating on education and culture and science that we can help create a more peaceful world.
So education is also one of MDGs, of Millennium Development Goals. And it is the goal that has been accomplished partially, but not fully. From the information that we have, the enrollment in primary education in developing regions was 90% in 2010, which means it went up from 82% in 1999. So there has been some improvement. But on the other hand, the reality is there are still 57 million children that are out of primary education. And also the other part of the reality is that in the last stretch of MDGs from 2008, the progress hasn't been so strong as in the beginning. So where are we at in the progress in education worldwide?
Absolutely. As you rightly said, we have seen a lot of progress, and I would say even back to 1990, when we had the first World Conference on Education for All, which was organized in Jomtien in Thailand in March 90, which was really a lot of UN agencies and governments coming together agreeing to the World Declaration on Education for All, and putting education high up on both national agendas, but of course also the international development agenda. And so gradually through the 90s, government started working on preparing education plans specifically focused on basic education, primary education in many, many countries, which was really lacking behind. The international community and the governments met again in Dakar in 2000, exactly 10 years later, and agreed to the Dakar Framework for Action on Education for All, which is a very comprehensive framework for action covering from early childhood care and education to access to primary education, lower secondary education, through making sure that the young people who never got an opportunity to go to school actually also are provided with non-formal education literacy programs. It focused on adult literacy, and it focused on the quality of education and gender equality. And as you said, we have seen globally a lot of progress, especially in the area of access to education, which a few months later became MDG 2, adopted by the General Assembly in September 2000. So I think we can celebrate that we have made a lot of progress on the access side, and I think we should remember to celebrate that because our efforts really have made a change. The problem now is that we still have 57 million kids out of school that we owe the opportunity also to get enrolled in education. But we also have a lot of kids who actually start going to school, but either they drop out prematurely before they ended primary or lower secondary education, or they may have been sitting in the classroom, but they didn't learn. They didn't learn well enough to actually achieve basic literacy and numerous skills. According to the estimates we have now, which has been done by the Global Monitoring Report on Education for All in the latest edition, we're talking about 220, 230 million kids who either did not go to school, the 57 million, but the rest actually did go to school, and they did actually spend more than 4 years in school, but they still don't have the basic literacy skills.
So then it's the quality of education?
Exactly. So that leaves us with big issues around the quality of education, the learning outcomes. And as you know, we are now moving into discussions in the UN General Assembly around what will happen when the MDGs come to an end in 2015.
That was actually going to be my next question. Yeah, so how is this going to happen? How can UNESCO and the United Nations assure that education has a very important role in SDGs and then it's structured in such a way that even more success can be brought out?
Of course, the SDGs are being discussed and will be decided eventually among member states of the UN. But of course we participate a lot also in the discussions, and there has been since June this year a lot of discussions in what is called the Open Working Group, and education has been one of the themes that have been discussed. Together with other partners, UNICEF, the World Bank, UNFPA, UNDP, who are also concerned about education, we are raising our voice in terms of saying that education is absolutely fundamental to achieving any sustainable development goal. Whether we talk about
the center of everything.
Absolutely. Whether we talk about poverty reduction, whether we talk about improving health, whether we talk about good governance, environment, climate change, we need to have an education component as part of that, a target focused on education, an indicator, in order to really make sure that we have linkages and it's clearly demonstrated how education contributes to achieving the other goals. But of course education is also a very, very important sector in itself. So we are also hoping that there will be
attention to that. So is there a strategy at UNESCO or something that UNESCO is planning to do to make sure that education really gets that central role in SDGs? What could we do, and how can any NGO like us and how can citizens support that?
The UNESCO General Conference that met in November 2013, and the board of UNESCO, which is meeting in early April, they are discussing education and how to position education in the new Sustainable Development Agenda. I think that, you know, across the board, and when we talk to member states, we talk to UNESCO member states, we talk to other UN agencies and other stakeholders, there is a very, very sort of broad consensus that education is absolutely fundamental. Now, it's true, as you mentioned early on, that while there was a lot of focus on education during the early years of the implementation of the MDG agenda, up to around 2008, it's sort of, the attention sort of became a little less, was a bit diffused, but I think
probably
it's
by the economic crisis as well, and lack
probably,
of resources.
Absolutely, and there were all of a sudden other priorities coming up, but I think education is coming back on the agenda again, and I think one of the things that have really contributed to that is that the Secretary General for the United Nations, he decided in 2012 that he really wanted to have a special emphasis on education. Hence, he created the Global Education First initiative.
Could you tell us a little bit about it? Because actually there are so many parallel tracks happening at the United Nations. There is a UNESCO Sustainable Education Program, then there is the Global Education First initiative, then there is the whole process of MDGs ending and then SDGs starting. So how does this initiative contribute to other efforts, and what does it do differently?
Okay. Global Education First initiative was, as I said, started and launched by the Secretary General himself in September 2012. And the motivation for starting the initiative was precisely that Mr. Ban Ki-moon felt that education wasn't really getting the attention it should have. And in this phase of finishing off on the MDG agenda and moving into a new SDG agenda, it was very important not to lose education, sight of education, and to keep it on the table and on the agenda. It's an advocacy initiative led by himself. There is a steering committee which is comprising major UN agencies with activities and programs in education. But also the World Bank, private sector, civil society, foundations, faith-based communities, and so on. So there's a 15-member steering committee, very high level, it's at principals level, who are all committed to advocating for education and to making sure, as I said, that we don't diffuse the attention on education. It's not a program. There are other programs that continue. There's a Global Partnership for Education, which is a basket fund, in a way you can say, where funds are mobilized to implement concrete education activities, especially in the poorest countries, post-conflict situations, and so on. So we're working very closely with them. We're working very closely basically with all other stakeholders, but just to make sure that our voices come together and really are raised and heard in terms of saying we need to have the 57 million kids out of school today in school, and we need to make sure that education is on the agenda for the next 15 years, and we need to make sure that children not only go to school but that they also learn. Hence, quality gets really at the center.
UNESCO has been also very forward-looking and a way brave in adopting the Sustainable Development Agenda pretty early, while we were still discussing whether there was climate change or not. Yeah. So 10 years ago, it started its decade program on sustainable development education, which is now coming to an end. And it has been implemented in 5 countries, out of which Dominican Republic, the country that we, in a way, as an NGO, represent here in the United States. So can you tell us about some lessons learned, some successes maybe? And
yeah. You're right. Back in 2005, the Decade for Education for Sustainable Development was launched, and it's coming to an end. But it has been a very interesting 10 years where we have worked in many, many countries actually, but it's true Dominican Republic has been very much at the center of a lot of the work we have done in order to make sure that education systems fully integrate education around sustainable development. Before that, there was teaching on environment issues in schools, but the whole concept of education for sustainable development is really very broad. It's bringing together the pillars of the Sustainable Development Agenda and really looking at, not only delivering knowledge to children, but also really engaging them in a discussion around sustainable development and also changing lifestyles and practices so that communities and societies really...
Because there are really different components in it. It's what they are learning.
Absolutely.
But it's also how they are living and how they are implementing what they are learning.
Exactly.
And it's also how they are learning. Because as I've seen from your initiative on sustainable development education, there is a lot about collaboration.
Absolutely.
Which is absolutely necessary nowadays in a global world for anything to happen and be fruitful for the world.
Yeah. So as you say, it's about the what, but it's certainly also about how children are living, or adults for that sake, because it also takes place in the context of non-formal education programs. It's a type of education which is very activity-based. It's active learning in the sense that we really encourage that children go out of the classroom and that they learn about their environment in their environment. We've conducted a very interesting program in many countries called Sand Watch, which is basically about observing the beach and the changes on the beach and the sea and so on. And it's about taking children out of the classroom and basically teaching them on the beach in the environment, which not only makes teaching much more interesting, maybe also more challenging sometimes for the teachers, but it certainly makes it more fun for the kids.
And also we more relevant.
Experience-based.
To the real world outside.
Exactly. So it's really engaging for the children or the adults or the young people.
So I have actually some questions here that we have received. Yes. Would you like to add something, sorry?
No, it's just we have conducted a lot of activities. We are working a lot with teachers, both in preschool, at teacher colleges, but also in-service teacher training to really help them and support them in the efforts to conduct activity-based.
So you have placed the teachers at the center of the initiative.
Right.
So I have two questions here that we received. We have a pretty worldwide base of audience and people who are subscribed to our newsletters and follow what we do and watch the global roundtables. So, and these questions come at a good moment as we are discussing how education is tied to the everyday real life. So the question comes from Aji Asivaju of Ibadan, Nigeria. And it's a difficult question. It says, how can insecurity be addressed with education? Because in the case of Nigeria, there is insurgency in northern part of the country that's basically disruptive to any education efforts.
Education can contribute. I'm not sure that you can solve the entire problem through education. But it goes back to the reasons why UNESCO was actually created. We came out of 2 world wars, as you said at the beginning, and it was because the international community, agreed that we don't want to see this again. We don't want these wars. We need to find ways of resolving problems in a more peaceful way, through dialogue, through sharing, through collaboration. And that is, of course, what UNESCO has been promoting through all the years, really trying to give youth and children and adults the tools to interact in a way which is not creating or avoiding creating conflicts, and more trying to help us all to resolve things in a peaceful manner. So we strongly believe in dialogue, in bringing in respect for diversity. I think it's very important to also emphasize in the new development agenda. You know, providing opportunities for discussions, for creating empathy, trying to put one another in other, you know, the other pair of shoes, to try and look at things from different viewpoints. And we're doing that in many different ways. We're doing that now with all the ICT, technology and so on. It's possible to connect schools with in different cultural contexts.
We're saying it's a process and it's a component of a much wider process.
And it's a component that we need to keep working on, that needs to be strengthened. And for that, I think, as I said, that we really have some opportunities now with modern technology. You know, we can use video, we can use mobile phones, technology, and so on, so that you know, we really connect to the global community.
And the other question comes from the other part of the world. It's from Hannah Laufer-Rothman. That works in a foundation, and her question is on the particular issue of poverty reduction, how you can teach poverty reduction unless it is accompanied by tangible actions relating to the quality of the educational service, including making schools totally friendly for boys and girls, including toilets with privacy for girls, toilet paper, handling of menstrual needs, ensuring food and water. It's a very broad question again, but I'm hoping for an answer with your experience in the field, because I know that you have seen all of that.
I think that what we need is really education systems which are geared towards contributing to eliminating poverty. Systems which are very inclusive. Teaching which is very inclusive. So it really brings all the children in, understands their different backgrounds, whether it's language backgrounds, whether they come from different social groups, ethnic groups, language groups, etc., to really demonstrate how we can be together, live together, and learn together. Of course, it's important to have learning environments which are child-friendly, which are precisely allowing also children with disabilities or physical disabilities and so on to come to school and to participate. So I would say that what we are really aiming for, and together with UNICEF and many other partners, is to create an education system which is 100% inclusive, and making sure that children don't only get to the school but really also learn, even though they have different abilities. But we work a lot with providing tools for teachers and training to teachers in diagnosing children's different learning needs and abilities, and giving them the tools for teaching a diverse classroom. Over the years we have developed many different materials for teacher training, and also strategies and practices for teachers to use. And I think we see a lot of change. But of course, many more things have to be done. We need to. We have a lot of good practices also on education for sustainable development. The difficult thing is to get them from project to really mainstream praxis into government policies.
Because there should be a lot of political will, and a lot of stakeholders in every society have to be part of it.
And education systems really need to make this their core agenda, and make sure that things are mainstreamed into teacher education, that teacher professional follow-up and so on is in place.
Well, thank you so much, Mrs. Jensen. It has been a real pleasure talking to you today about UNESCO, education, and the world issues. Thank you.
My
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Global Roundtable organized by the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development. Today we have talked to Mrs. Vibeke Jensen, the director of the UNESCO office in New York.